And I will let everyone in now, and we can start in a minute. I will just say a few words, and then we can just move on to the presentations. Just when you're not speaking, of course, mute yourselves, and that's all. Hi, everyone. We'll be starting in a minute. I'm just letting people in because everyone is coming in now. But I think we can slowly start. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our first dMSA, Digital Memory Studies Association event this year. My name is Jelena Đurinović. I work at the University of Vienna, and I'm also a member of the Executive Committee of the Memory Studies Association. Today, we are talking about war and memory in the football context, and we are looking at the examples from the Second World War, from the wartime and post-war Algeria, and also from the post-Yugoslav space. And we have three amazing speakers today, and it's my pleasure to welcome Olga Ruženik, Mahfoud Amara, and Dario Brentin. They will all present their case studies for about 15 to 20 minutes each before we move on to the discussion with the audience. We might also reflect on the World Cup a bit at the end. And I would just like to ask everyone to mute themselves if they haven't done so. And our first speaker is Olga Ruženik, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Social Sciences of Politics in Nanterre in France. And she will be talking about the so-called death match played in Kiev in 1942 and its representations in first the Soviet propaganda, but then also the Ukrainian and Russian media today. Olga, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for everybody. So good evening or good day if you're from United States here. So I'm going to talk about this death match. I'm not sure it's going to be very much linked to World Cup, but I would rather say it will be linked to the current events that is happening to Ukraine right now. So there is, of course, the link between. So I will first start, before I will share some pictures, some photos, I will start with the myth of the death match. I'm pretty sure you've heard about it. Even if you don't know about it directly, you've heard about it for sure. So the story, the myth is the following. The 9th of August, 1942, there is a football team of Kievan players from originally Dynamo Kiev. They are playing against the team of United German soldiers and officers, and they're winning. And the second match, they were threatened with death, and they were kind of ordered to lose, but they didn't lose, and they were shot and killed, executed after the war, after the match directly. So that's sort of the story and the myth of this game. If you heard about it before, you probably have seen a couple of movies inspired by this story. For example, I learned about it. I didn't know before, but I learned about it, that there are some movies in United States. For example, the movie from 1974, The Longest Yard, with Burt Reynolds, that is inspired by these events. And there's another movie with Michael Caine and Sylvester Stallone that called Escape to Victory from 1981. Absolutely copy-pasted the story of this death match. But this is just a myth. Now let's go a little bit to the reality of what exactly happened in 1942. So with the outbreak of war, NKVD was People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, is kind of Soviet police at that time. They worked in Kiev until the last hours of preservation of Soviet regime during the Second World War. But the rapid advance of the Nazi army, German army, it played a role in the fact that a lot of the NKVD members stayed in Kiev during the occupation, and a lot of the members of NKVD, they were members, they were players of this team called Dynamo Kiev. Dynamo was a name of Soviet association for NKVD members and police members. For example, Lokomotiv was the sport association for the railway workers, and in this way, Dynamo was for police and NKVD members. So NKVD members and the former players of Dynamo Kiev, a lot of them stayed in Kiev during the occupation. And they had to find another jobs, and a lot of them found, a number of the former players, they found a job in the Kiev Bakery #1 as of 1942. At that time, some former players from Lokomotiv Kiev as well worked in this Kiev Bakery #1. They were all worked as loaders. They were loaded heavy. Their official status were there as the loaders, and they started to play football, and apparently occupation authorities allowed them to play matches in the newly opened Zenit Stadium. Why we know it? Because in the newspaper New Ukrainian World, it was published on July the 12th, 1942. The following message was published. Opening of the stadium. Today at 4 p.m. the Ukrainian stadium opens, and entrance from Prozorovska Street. Opening program, gymnastics, boxing, athletics, and the most interesting part of the program is football match, and the start at 5:30 p.m. This is the first print mention of the team that we know afterwards as the team called Start, exactly. It was sort of a united team between the players of Dynamo Kiev at the time and Lokomotiv Kiev, beg your pardon. And so at the openings of the first game of the Start team, with a team of the German military units that was deployed and stationed in Kiev at that time, and they won with the 3-0, as far as I remember. But we know exactly that during June and July 1942, Start played in 7 matches. It's against 2 Ukrainian teams, then 3 matches against Hungarian military team, and 2 matches against German team. One German team was military team, so of military unit, and another one was railway team of German railway workers. Start won all the matches, all of those 7 matches. And then we're going to the August 6th, 1942. So I'm going to share my screen with some of the photos of the posts and everything over here. I'm just going to open it this way. I hope that everybody, 1 second, will be able to see it. Just one moment. I hope I will. I'm trying to open it on the big screen, so you will see everything. Until I'm trying to open it better. The thing is, this is the first, like on the 6th of August, 1982. So the Start defeated the team called Flakel. I don't know why I cannot. Yes, I will be able. Yes. Okay. That's a success. So on August the 6th, 1942, Start defeated the Flakel team, which consisted of German soldiers and air defense officers, with a score of 5-1. 3 days later, on the 9th of August, 1942, and this is going to be the official of this game, the team reunited for a rematch, and this game was later named as the death match. So what exactly happened? The thing is, we don't have any video, radio recordings of the match. What do we know? We know only written recordings of the first half of the match that was found in the NKVD archives. It is documented that the score was opened by the Germans. So it was the first goal. Then Ukrainian side scored 3 times. There are some different notes. What was the final score? Probably it was 5-1. There's more likely it was 5-1. So maybe on the second half, Ukrainians, not Ukrainians, I would rather say Soviets, for this, to be fair, scored twice afterwards. After the match, there was a photo taken of the both teams, kind of showed in a very relaxed atmosphere, both of the teams. And it was the copy was given to former Lokomotiv player Vladimir Balakin. And I'm going to put the names of the Ukrainian players over here because I'm going to reference to them. So probably it's really good to find them on the picture as well. This match happened on the 9th of August, 1942. On the 16th of August, 1942, Start, the team, played again against Ukrainian team called Ruch, and they won 8-0. Then, 2 days afterwards, on the 18th of August, the Gestapo arrested 6 Start players. This is what we know. We found in the recordings in the archives. So the 20th of August, so 2 days later, there was 2 more players were arrested by the Gestapo. Yes, from Start team. 2 players died during Gestapo interrogation. So it's Alexander Tkachenko. He was trying to escape and he was shot by SS officer. And Mykola Korotkih, I would rather say, he was tortured to death during interrogation. This is all the proof that we can find in the archives. This is what we know for sure. Then after the rest of the team, the rest of the arrested members of the Start team, then they were deported to the Syrets concentration camp in Kiev. The thing is, the 2 people who were killed during Gestapo interrogations, so Tkachenko and Korotkih, they were not the players of Dynamo Kiev before. They were players. They were NKVD agents, not agents, but the former NKVD members, and they were playing in the Start thing, but they were not Dynamo Kiev football players. So they were killed during interrogations. 6 people were in the concentration camp in Kiev. 3 of those players were executed on the 24th of February, 1943, but they were executed amongst the group of other prisoners. We don't know exactly why that happened. There are some reasons. Maybe it was sabotage. I've seen there was maybe attempt to escape, or there was a story that a dog of a guard didn't like some prisoners. So we don't know exactly the reason, but they were shot on the 24th of February, 1943. Was those executions linked to the match as it was presented in the myth? No. Why we can talk about this? Because according to the archives of NKVD, surviving Start players that were interrogated by NKVD after the end of the Second World War, they said that those arrested members of Start team by Gestapo were denounced by others as NKVD agent and as those who could organize some sort of acts of sabotage in Kiev. Besides, the former players of Lokomotiv football team, they never from Start. They were never arrested, neither persecuted by the Gestapo in Kiev. And even after the end of the war, another fact why we can say it's not really about the football in itself, it's absolutely a myth, that after the end of the war, all of the surviving members of the Start were surveillance and prosecuted by NKVD. Even 2 of the players, namely Timofeyev and Gundayev, they were sentenced to Gulag for 5 years, the first one, and second one to 10 years in Gulag. Then let's talk about kind of creation of the myth. I'm just thinking, no, not here yet. We'll leave it here. The creation of the myth It started to happen only after the Second World War, after the end. So the expression of deathmatch first appeared in the newspaper. It's I think in English it's called Stalin's Tribe, Stalinskaya Plемя, and it was on the 24th of August 1946, and it was published was sort of like a publication of a script for a film by Alexander Borshevsky. In 1958, this Alexander Borshevsky wrote a book, a novel based on the script that's called Altered in Clouds, about this match. Of course, it was dramatization of the story. And in the year after, 1959, there was another novel that was published by Pyotr Severov and Naum Kalinsky. It's called The Last Duel, about this game. And the thing is about those two novels, they were all claimed that after the end of the match, all of the members of Star Team were executed almost like on the spot. So that was the myth that started to born at that time. And those novels afterwards inspired a movie, the film called Third Time, by Evgeny Karelov in 1962, very popular Soviet movie at that time. In 1966, the magazine Yunost, one of the most popular magazines and reviews in Soviet time, they published a story about this death match, dramatization about the resistance of the players and the sacrifice they done for sport itself. Not really Soviet regime at that time, but the sport that they were so, they couldn't sacrifice their integrity just to save their lives. And under the rule of Brezhnev, Leonid Brezhnev, the propaganda emphasized, of course, the heroism of the Soviet population during the Second World War, and the death match became really a part of the Soviet war history. Those 4 players who died during Gestapo interrogation and the concentration camps. Normally there were 5, but for some reason there was only 4. They received some award. There was a medal for courage. It was, of course, but posthumously, and 5 surviving players received the medal for the battle. In 1971, there was 2 monuments that was erected in Kiev. Was one monument. It was near it's still right now there, near the Zenit Stadium, and another one. No, this one was erected in 1971, and then another one was already in the independence Ukraine. I will show you afterwards a little bit this one. So this monument was erected in 1971 by still Soviet authorities. But if we go right now to Ukrainian media, already after the end of the Soviet regime, after the collapse of communist regime, then in 1992 there was the book that was published by Georgy Kuzimin that said the truth about the death match. And in 1992 it was dedicated to the 50 years after this match took place. There's a lot of interviews with surviving members of the team, a lot of witnesses that would really claim that that's absolutely myth. There was no direct execution afterwards. There was no threatening of execution before, during, and after the match. So it was sort of like debunking of the myth that took place in the media, in Ukrainian media. However, there are some monuments and commemoration that happened in Ukraine, not directly or indirectly linked to so-called death match, because in 1999, near the place of Siretz concentration camp, where 4 members of the Start football team were executed, amongst other prisoners, they had this commemorance sign is erected, the one that I'm right now you can see on the screen. And as well, in 2006, there was another interesting event that took place. It's called Friendship Match, that kind of in the opposition of this death match, there was a friendship match. It took place in 2006 between amateur team journalists of Ukraine against the editors of the German magazine called Der Spiegel. And objective was to honor the athletes victims of the Second World War. I'm not sure it was really much it was kind of like maybe the play of the words. I'm not sure it was absolutely directly linked to the death match because of A, it was not about this game in particular, and B, it took place on the May 27th, while the real so-called death match took place on the 9th of August. So that is Ukrainian side media. I tried to find afterwards the proof, not the proof, but the mentioning in Ukrainian media about this. In the 90s, there was a lot of debunking of this myth. And afterwards, it went kind of silent. I conducted research for my PhD project on Ukrainian ultras, and when I spoke to the ultras of Dynamo Kiev, I mentioned this event, and absolutely nobody really much reacted about this. This event didn't become really much memorable or important event for Ukrainian side. However, let's go to Russian side right now for Independence Channel. I'm just right now show you the one that I found. During the 90s, I didn't find any that much stories to get dedicated to this death match on Russian media, or it was not really important, I would say like this, or maybe on the channels that didn't have a lot of, it was not that popular. It happened until 2007. There's Первый канал, the first channel, probably we can translate it this way. It's the most powerful, I think, the most popular channel in Russia. They broadcasted an episode of a popular program called The Searchers, and about this death match. Unfortunately, it's not already online. However, in the archives, we can find this video, and they have a wonderful description of it. I'm going to read a little bit. I hope I'm not going running too much late about my time. Just a little bit. I have 5 minutes. So I'm just read for you the description of this episode. So, in the center of Kiev, there is a monument to the football players of Dynamo Kiev. Now the legend of their feat, of the victory during the war, has begun to be forgotten. Bear in mind, it's 2007. But in Soviet times, the whole country seemed to know their story. What Dynamo did became a vivid symbol of resistance to fascism. The players who remained in Kiev were summoned by the German command and ordered to play against the German army team. Under the threat of being shot, the Dynamo team was ordered to lose the match, but they won, and they were executed just after the match. It still continues the description. So what they say, the Dynamo team was ordered to, and the searchers, this program, became interested in the story and found out that ours, look at this, the word that they use, ours, not Ukrainian, not Soviet, our players did not suffer, were not punished because of the victory of the match, but the confrontation resulted in a whole series of matches in which the people of Kiev won. All this was political in nature. The stadium at each game was filled to its full capacity, and judging by the reaction of the fans, one might have thought that the Wehrmacht team and the Red Army team were playing against each other. Moreover, in the most tense moments of the match, anti-fascist slogans sounded over the stadium. The situation was so tense that the guards had to periodically shoot into the air. So that was a description and sort of a narrative of that episode by the most popular channel in Russian media space, 2007. Then there was in 2012 another episode of I would say documentary. I want to say the word documentary by another Russian channel called Russia VGTRK. It's the second popular channel in Russian media space. It's called Execution for the Victory, the Truth About the Death Match. The narrative is kind of the same. So the resistance to the fascist regime, the Soviet, our Soviet people, this narrative of Russian-Ukrainian thing really close to each other. And as well in 2012, same year, I kind of think that it's linked to the 70 years anniversary after the day of the game. There was another movie documentary called Deathmatch, labeled secret by the channel Star, very much, it's called Zvezda, Star, so very much propagandist Russian channel, and it was really Sovietism against fascism, and everything kind of in this propaganda usage of the story culminated, I think, in this movie, the movie of 2012. It was released as well, high budget movie with one of the most popular actors at that time in Russian film industry. It dedicated to the match. I had a pleasure of watching that movie just for this presentation. Well, just one sign, of course, all the Russian speakers were good, all the Ukrainian speakers were bad. Of course, it was a lot really, really Ukrainophobic as for me. And again, I'm Ukrainian, so maybe I'm not that objective about it. But I can tell you this kind of interesting to see how even in the propaganda has changed by using this event, that at the beginning it was a little bit Soviet anti-fascist vision of maybe of the propaganda in general, of the Soviet and then Russian afterwards. So I don't want to push a little bit more. I think I'm out of the time, so I'm going to stop my presentation right now, and I give the word to Yelena. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. If you can just stop sharing your screen so that Mahfoud can share his presentation. Our next speaker is Mahfoud Amara, who is Associate Professor in Sport Management and Social Sciences at Qatar University. And today he will be talking about sport in Algeria during and after the independence war.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for selecting this really fascinating topic, and thank you, Olga, as well, for your enthusiasm. And here it's already what time we are, 7:26. So so your enthusiasm is going to help me, to push. And so I'm just a follow up on what Olga was saying, and I think there is some kind of shared themes. Is about this memory that is always selective. It's a notion that involves, as Ricoeur will say, inertia, even forgetfulness. We tend to forget, we tend to be selective in terms of how we choose our memory. It depends on which narrative we want to promote. And so here I'll be talking about the narrative of the Algerian state, which has been kind of defined around the struggle of the Algerian people and their mobilization against the French colonialism. Of course, we cannot talk about the Algerian memory without going back to the memory of the colonial era, which is yet to be constructed, deconstructed, and kind of explored in both sides, in the Algerian side, but also in the French side. So the first aspect, the first dominant foundation of this memory is the struggle of the Algerian people for their liberation from French colonialism. And then the process of the mobilization of the Algerian people around socialist and anti-imperialist ideologies and third worldism, particularly starting from from independence 1962 up until, let's say, the 1980s. And then the notion of national reconciliation following the almost 10 years of quasi-civil war, which started in the 90s, and we talk, it's usually promoted or labeled as the Black Decade. It's 10 years of a bloody war that involved, the states, the governments, the regime, and those who, on the Islamist parties. So I will try. Also, when I'm talking about the state narrative, I will try also to bring the counter narrative as well. So it's not only one linear. So in opposition to this one linear essentialist, and for some kind of narrative of the either of the of the states or the regime. There is also other counter narratives in relation to political ideology, in relation to identity in plural, in identities with regards to religion and language, and then the youth, how they perceive this narrative and how they use football to as a space to counter the kind of the official institutional narrative about many aspects to do with their identity and with their with their future as Algerian as well, within Algeria or beyond Algeria and the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. And when we talk about Algeria, we cannot associate Algeria, in relation to people who are living in Algeria, but we have to talk about the diaspora, which is the legacy of this colonial colonial era. We're talking about around 10 million Algerians that are living outside Algeria, either because they are, as part of this legacy of the colonial past. Many of the Algerians had to leave Algeria to find other alternatives, in terms of, just to survive. And to work mainly in the factories in France, but also in relation to the recent migration during the civil war. So when we talk about football in colonial era, so from the colonial perspective, the colonial order, colonial administration, we talk about the divide. First, there was a divide between citizens, who are the European settlers, and then the rest, the indigenous people, they didn't have the rights, as the same rights as the European settlers, because they didn't have the citizenship rights. And here, maybe we need to make also the distinction between the Arab population and the Jewish community as well, that were living in Algeria before colonialism. The Jewish were given the citizenship in the around the 1870s, because there was this willingness by the colonial order to make this divide between the Jewish population and the Arab and Muslim population. But during the Second World War, the Jewish Algerian, their citizenship was removed, was because of their Jewishness. So at the beginning of this colonial era, there was this distinction between the citizens and the rest. For the Algerians who had they experienced this modern sports and football, they had to master it. Then because they had to use it afterwards for their cause, either to affirm that Algerian identity, which is different from that of the one that is imposed by the colonial administration. For the, we're talking about the 40s, up to the 50s, there was this idea from the colonial administration, to use the sport and football and sport in general to promote its notion of the civilizing mission of Algeria, and and then the mass participation of the indigenous people in sports, and embracing the sport was kind of promoted as a way for the success of the colonial administration to assimilate those populations to modern sports, and therefore to modernizing them, which reconfort kind of the narrative and the justification of colonialism of Algeria. Then there was a moment where, with the rise of nationalist sentiments, the colonial administration, they made sure that to keep all the teams mixed with mixed ethnic minorities, and not to have a Muslim-only teams, so that they will not use the football as a space for their to promote their nationalist kind of sentiments against the colonial administration. For the Algerians, football became, a way to serve the national identity, distinctively of the idea of French Algeria, and as a break as well of the colonial system, because in 1954 there was the start of the armed struggle, the Algerian Revolution, and the leader of that time of the Algerian Revolution, the FLN, which is the National Liberation Front, they decided to stop every activity, sports activity, as a way to break with the colonial kind of system. So 1956, they asked all Algerians who were playing in Algeria, all outside Algeria to stop any activity. But then in 1958, what they did, because football started to become very popular, and so we have now the FIFA World Cup, which is becoming kind of a regular event that was bringing more and more nations. So what they did, the Algerian nationalist movement, they formed their national team, the FLM team 1958. 1958 was the World Cup in Sweden. Some of the players, Algerian players, were playing in France, and they were also playing with the French national team. They had to give up their, their career, professional career in France, and then to travel in clandestine manner to Tunisia to form this the first Algerian national independent team. So in a way, Algeria, from a modern sense point of view, it started like a football national team before it was recognized as an independent state. So that's explained the passion around football in Algeria. Of course, the French, they were trying to maintain French Algeria, but it was not possible because of the violence was so so important that it was the idea of French Algeria becomes impossible. And this is reflected in some of the pictures here. So, for example, we had 1921 was the formation of the Algerian, not the first, but officially the first Arab Muslim club called Mouloudia. And this was, a way for the Algerians to say that they are ready now to form their own teams, football teams, to express their own identity. So 1921 was a key moment in terms of the formation of Algerian football teams. And then you have this picture of all the professional players, Algerian players who were playing in France, some of them, I think, in Belgium. They were asked by the National Liberation Front to leave, their countries, and in France, in Belgium, and bring their families. Some of those players were married to French, their wives were French, Europeans, and they asked them to come to Tunisia to form this national team. Of course, FIFA at that time, they banned every national team that would play with this team because it was not recognized. So most of the matches they had was with either teams from the Arab region that already were independent and they were officially member of the FIFA. So some of them, they were banned, by decision by FIFA, or they were playing with the socialist countries that were, they were in favor of Algerian independence and of favor of Algeria to become part of the, of the socialist bloc. And so between this narrative of the colonial kind of narrative of maintaining French Algeria, and then the Algerian nationalist narrative of forming their own separate national sports system, there was also in between another narrative. And this is a picture of Albert Camus, as you know, the Nobel Prize winner of literature, and he was playing, as a goalkeeper. So he was saying that everything I learned about life, I learned it, and morality, I learned it through football. And for him, he was really, trying to, until the end, trying to see if there's, to promote this idea of a Mediterranean Algeria that can bring together diverse populations, European populations in Algeria with the indigenous population, to form this possibility, like maybe in South Africa, or a possibility of another nation that is more multicultural, multi-ethnic. Albert Camus, is Algerian, born in Algeria, but is of Spanish origin. There were also many Italians living in Algeria as well. So that he had this idea of maybe the possibility of a Mediterranean kind of a new Algeria, which is Mediterranean, but it didn't work, as we know. And so the violence made that it was impossible to have this coexistence. Now we move a little bit to post-independence, socialist Algeria. Algeria chose to be in the Eastern Bloc, as in opposition again to the colonial past. And with that, they rejected professional sports. It was only professional sport was officially recognized only. I think it was in the 90s, late 90s, after FIFA, they imposed on all national, on all national sports, football systems to have a professional league. So, but before that, Algerian players, they were not allowed to sign a professional contract. I think there was even some restrictions about age. I think it's only if they were up to 30, and they had to get some approval, to be able to sign a professional contract and then play outside Algeria. So professionalism, professional sport was rejected. There was more cooperation with Eastern Bloc, with Eastern Germany, USSR, Yugoslavia. For example, Yugoslavia, they helped in the building of now the 5th July Stadium, which is a temple, the main stadium in Algiers that hosted the Mediterranean Games. What is it? Was it 1975? Only 23 years after independence. So there is this cooperation, and there was also this notion of Arab identity, Arab solidarity of, with the Eastern Bloc, with the Communist Bloc. And here we see, for example, the Ben Bella, who was the first president of independent Algeria, hosting Pelé and the Garincha for a match that they had in 1965. It was in the 17th of June. And this is really interesting date because it was while Ben Bella was in the match watching Brazil against the Algerian national team in Oran, which is in the west of Algeria. Boumediene, who was the head of the army, he chose that date to go for, to do the military coup against Ben Bella. So, so 17th of June, 1965 is now, is known for this famous match, but also is known for the military coup, which evicted Ben Bella, and who stayed, I think, in jail for I don't know how many years until the 1980s, and then he went afterwards to exile in Switzerland, and he came back only after 1988. And in relation to this socialist Algeria, there was also a moment where, after the independence, Algerians, they wanted, particularly the FLN states, the National Liberation Party that controlled, the politics, after the independence, so they wanted to have one narrative about Algerian unity, that Algeria is Arab Muslim, and that was the kind of the most dominant narrative. But by doing this, they rejected every local and other regional identities. And it was interesting that in the 1970s, the state decided to attach all clubs, regional clubs, to a national company and not to the region. So they had to change their names so that to be attached to the national companies that were sponsoring those teams, so that they will not use any symbols that reflects their regional identity or linguistic identity, in this case, with regards to the Berber identity and the Amazigh identity. Yeah. Then we move the end of socialist era, 1988, the beginning of the multi-party system in Algeria, and after the elections, the first parliamentary elections in 1991, the army had to decide, to intervene because they didn't want the Islamist party to take the majority of the seats of the parliament. So they interrupted the elections to save. That's the narrative at the time, is to save democracy from the Islamist party, and this started, a decade of quasi civil war. And what is interesting, and this happened after Algeria won its first African Cup title, and it was organized in Algeria. So it was the last title that Algeria won, before. Major title that won before the civil war. They had to wait until 2010 to qualify again, to the FIFA World Cup. They were only able to qualify twice, 1982 and 1986. So they had to wait until 2010 to qualify again to the FIFA World Cup. So what happens? We had like two opposing narratives and during that era of quasi-civil war. So for the regime, football is important to maintain a certain sense of normality in times of violence, to oppose armed groups and the generalization of violence. For the Islamist parties, the football space was an important place for rally, for political rally, to show, to promote, or to highlight its kind of its power as a political party and a demonstration of force. And then, for the regime, they had to maintain certain participation in international competition and maintaining Algeria's presence and visibility in international competitions, qualifications up until 2010 and 2014, which was announced, what the qualification of the national team into South Africa and then to Brazil. This was announced as the end of this quasi-civil war. For the armed groups, it was football system. It became a legitimate target, because it represents the regime. And these are some examples of that time, which still vivid in the memory of at least my generation, and it was a terrible moment, of 10 years of violence. We talk about 500,000 Algerians died, so here are some pictures of the FIS, which is the Islamist party, using the 5th of July stadium that was that hosted the Mediterranean Games as a space for political rally. This picture is of his name is Dhemi, and is nicknamed Yamaha by the supporters. He's a very well-known, one of the popular supporter of a team in Algiers called Shabab Belouizdad, the youth of Belouizdad, and he was targeted. He was assassinated on the 11th of June 1995 because he was representing this fandom and celebration, and during in a time of civil war, and it was perceived as some kind of a provocation. So he was assassinated. This picture is by Rashid Haraig. He was the head of the Algerian Football Federation. He was also killed on the 23rd of January 1995. These are pictures of the Algerian qualification to 2010 FIFA World Cup. It was a decisive game against Egypt. And then the celebration. It was the first time, maybe after a long, time of civil war and violence, that Algerians went again to the streets, to celebrate, the success of the Algerian national team. I will finish now with this last. Sorry, maybe I've taken too much time. The youth, how the youth have been using football space. It was, starting from the 80s and onward, there was the formation of this ultras groups. That is the same phenomenon that you would find in other countries in North Africa, in Morocco, in Tunisia, and then Egypt. So football becomes the place to counter the narrative of the states in terms of many things, with regards to religion, with regards to national identity, with regards to the freedom of speech, the freedom to move and to travel and to be mobile, and being able to go to the other side of the Mediterranean. So it was a place to resist against to deconstruct the kind of the official narrative of the states. And then they played an important role afterwards, in the more lately with what we call Al-Hirak movements. There was weeks and weeks of starting from 2019 of Algerians going to the street by millions to ask for regime change, and they were using the chants of the football supporters as a way to express their desire, for freedom and more democratization and more. So football played an important role for this youth to, to form their own kind of their own space where they can express themselves. And then when we talk about the youth, we have to talk about the diaspora as well. So how the Algerians that are living in France are countering the narrative of the French states about their citizenship, and how they are using football as a way to say to the French society, and particularly to the far right movements in France, that it's not a problem. There's no conflict of being Algerian, being French citizen, and expressing your Algerian identity, expressing your celebrating the Algerian national team success, even in France, inside France, or for some players who are born in France of Algerian origin to choose to play for the national team. This doesn't mean that they are not loyal to France, and there is a possibility where you can express this duality of identity without this, without this impacting on their belonging, either in France, their country of birth, or nor in Algeria, which is their country of origin. And you can see here players like Zidane, that have been criticized for expressing his Algerian identity, or Benzema, lately. So, I hope I managed to cover. There's a lot, to cover in terms of. And thank you for giving us this platform to try to, give a little bit kind of overview of the different dimensions around this memory and the selective memory, and how this is expressed within the football context.
Thank you. And our last speaker today is Dario Brentin, who works at the University of Applied Sciences in Vienna, and he will be talking about the post-Yugoslav space, focusing on the football fans and their articulations of memory. Dario, go ahead. Unmute yourself, please.
See, 2.5 years of this and still the same issues for some people, for others not. Hello to everyone, wherever you are. Thank you very much, Jelena, for organizing this. I'm looking forward to sort of hearing your thoughts and ideas. Thank you very much to my two pre-speakers. It was quite fascinating. I quite like sort of the way that we're moving forward in history with our presentations. What I will be talking about is a little bit maybe different, because we'll try to outline is a bit much maybe, but talk about a project that is in the making, a project that I'm developing together, or have been developing together with Vjeran Pavakovic from the University of Rijeka in Croatia. We haven't given it really a title or anything, but sort of to have something zingy, I thought, why not go with the muralist zeitgeist and have sort of a big word in there for our title today. But what I am looking at, and what we would like to be looking at, and what I will be presenting you today, is mainly the way Croatian football fan groups act as agents of memorialization, or muralization, as we call it. If you look at this first slide, just take particular notice of the gentleman pointing his middle finger on his right hand in the middle, because you'll see him in a few slides again, sort of a mural in front of Dinamo Zagreb's Maksimir Stadium, depicting a famous photography from 1990. What Vjeran and I noticed being in Zagreb, often, or him living there, is that over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, there's been a process, an ever-accelerating process, in which, if you see to the right here, a mural, a much-loved mural from the 1990s of The Little Prince of Saint-Exupéry's book, being basically as in Germany would say, Nacht und Nebel Aktion. So without anyone really knowing how and why, it being destroyed and then being covered up by a large scale 40 to 50 meters long mural depicting several moments of the Homeland War of the so-called Homeland War of the 1990s, or the Croatian War of Independence, if you want to have a more neutral term. And what we are interested in is to see why this is happening, and I'll give you sort of a few more, not just a few more, a lot more examples in order to illustrate this ongoing process of muralization, or, you know, provocatively, you could say, Belfastization of Croatian cityscapes. To take a step back, sport in Croatia, for those who don't know the context, can be, or that's the way that I would describe it, is a form of highly politicized expression of Croatian national identity. It is a salient social field in which the national habitus codes, as expressed or as written about by Bourdieu or Elias, are most intensively articulated, debated, and contested. In that way, the reproduction of memory narratives in the post-Yugoslav context has been talked about a lot of times. And I'm sure that many of you have read and listened to, and maybe I haven't seen the list of participants even written about memory narratives in the post-Yugoslav space, but they've been examined within the field of veterans movements, commemorations, popular music, and so on and so forth. Sport is one of the fields that one could arguably say is one of the sort of a very salient field of creating identity in popular culture that has been largely ignored. And here we argue that particularly athletes, officials, and fans employ social agency in an influential social arena, and thereby create narratives of remembrance of war, particularly in context to, or in reference to, the Homeland War in the 1990s, but also further beyond particularly the World War II, and at times even prior to that, discussing and constructing Croatian nationhood throughout the 20th century in their ways, so to say. The two sort of main things that I'll be talking and I'll be illustrating to you today is the so-called Maxima myth, and the way that the Maxima myth is being deconstructed, reconstructed, cemented within Croatian popular society, or sorry, popular culture and society through football and football fandom and these sort of mnemonic practices, but also other forms of ritualized practices, banners, various forms of activism, but predominantly sort of the strong visuality of murals in Croatian cityscapes. Okay. Yes. So football fan groups, so just a couple of theoretical considerations. I mean, we generally look at football fan groups as social movements. One can argue, you know, to what extent are they social in their predominant form of antisocial behavior, in which many of us have discussed and analyzed them. But I think it's important to see and to analyze them as politically paradox, and to see sort of the duality and the nuance in the way that they operate and then the way that they engage as mnemonic actors. Football fan groups can act, and Mahmoud has also talked about that, as actors of democratization, but also de-democratization. And also I'll show that in a couple of slides later on. We can also ask to what extent, particularly sort of in the way that memory narratives are being promulgated, whether this is a new form of authoritarianism from below, a way of totalizing very authoritarian memory of the Homeland War into not just Croatian cityscapes, but also further beyond into the hearts and minds of people in Croatia. Sorry very much. This was my dog, who's quite angry at times. Yes, to come back, football fan groups in Croatia, to give you a bit of a context, are widely socially marginalized. They're very well organized and are small in number, but have experienced widespread media vilification over the last 30 years for a variety of reasons. May that be the constant engagement in violence, the constant engagement in right-wing and extremist political ideology. But at the same time, they're being praised for their patriotism and for their mnemonic practices, which secure the so-called dignity of the Homeland War, with which Croatia gained its independence in the 1990s. In that way, they are identified as social actors or memory entrepreneurs, positioning themselves at the very center of Croatian statehood and at the very center of the ideological production and reproduction of an official memory. Or is the question here? Because you will see there are also some conflicts between official memory, which tends to be, in the Croatian case, a fairly one refined to national imagery and national stereotypes and a national historiography, but is at times questioned not in the way how football fans remember the war, not in a more progressive, but even in a more conservative, sort of a more regressive way, and thereby clashes with an already fairly nationalistic official memory. In general, one last step back, and I promise then I'll get to the pictures. Organized football fan groups have been and are still predominantly analyzed through the prism of Yugoslav disintegration in the entire space, not just in Croatia, but also in Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. That has to do, I mean, this is understandable to a certain extent, but I think it's important to also argue that we need to take a step beyond that. The reason for that is that they did experience significant politicization in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and played a role. Now, the significance of the role depends. It depends who you ask how significant their role is being identified and perceived. But they did play a role during the Yugoslav Wars of Dissolution, particularly as volunteers in the early stages of the war on the Croatian side, on let's say the Serbian side, in quotation marks, the ominous role of Alkan's Tigers, a paramilitary formation who ravaged in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, has famously recruited many of their members from the organized football fan group of the Delije from Belgrade, from the fan group, the official fan group of Red Star Belgrade. Now, at the same time, and so this is the duality of it, there is the Yugoslav wars do represent a central aspect or a central pillar of identity for many of these groups' identities. Yes, most of them have been formed in the late 1980s and have went through an accelerated process of politicization through the wars. Which is thereby then not surprising that the Yugoslav wars have such a central role in the way that they not just understand themselves and their role, but also in the way that they portray themselves. In the Croatian context, as said, politicization of Croatian football fan groups, and I'll just for those who are not aware, let's focus on the four main ones. Which would be the Bad Blue Boys of Dinamo Zagreb, which would be Torcida of Hajduk Split, the Armada of NK Rijeka, and the Kohorta of NK Osijek. have all been formed and have went through the formative period in the late 1980s and have been identifying ever since through a nationalist prism. Perasovic and Mustapic, two great sociologists, and Dražen Lalić, have called them, have called the new patriotic movement as the lowest common denominator of these groups. Apart from that, it's the Homeland War that does represent a central aspect of that presents sort of a central frame of identification for many of these groups, and remains to do so even 30 years beyond, and even taken into consideration that many of the particularly younger members of these groups are by now born already in the 2000s. You have sort of various, let's say, sort of similarly to many other ultras groups all over Europe, you have a very active young generation, usually between 14 and 18, 20. Then you have sort of a leadership group that is also very active in their 20s. And then as they get older, they sort of take a step back in the ranks, but remain influential in the stands, whereas you still in the Bad Blue Boys and others have members well into their 40s and 50s who remain ideologically present and are to a certain extent also shaping these narratives. Okay. Yes. As said, just prior to the centrality of the Homeland War for organized football fan groups in Croatia, you've had Dinamo Zagreb and Torpedo Split have had their organized fans recruits, particularly in the early phases of the Homeland War, into the Croatian army, and prior to that, even in paramilitary formations. Something that we won't be getting to talk too much today, sort of a problematic aspect due to its ideological predominant ideological sentiments within these paramilitary formations, which tended to be all the way to openly fascist. But here it's again a bit of a chicken and the egg question, with the question of whether these fans went into these paramilitary formations or into the army because they were football fans, or were they there and they were football fans as well. As far as we know, there weren't any units that were formed around club affiliation, but if you look at veterans organizations, there are veterans organizations and sort of subunits who are identifying themselves via their club loyalty. So that's a bit of it's not entirely clear out of the data which was first, whether first fans or first soldiers. The Maximir myth, and sort of as said, the gentleman to the right is someone you might have is the guy from the first slides. It's quite an iconic set of images from a Zagreb-based photographer of the occurrence of the 13th of May 1990, the so-called game that was never played between Red Star Belgrade and Dinamo Zagreb. And yes, Jelena, I got your text, perfect. And this game has gone into not just national folklore, but has become sort of a central aspect of how the Bad Blue Boys in Zagreb and also beyond identify their role in the creation of Croatian national statehood. Now, Croatia was not independent for another year. The war had not happened for another year, but this game has gone down as the game that the day that the war started. It was a game where certainly the magnitude of the violence that occurred during the stadium riots, and also the fact that it wasn't played, is something that was never seen until then in Yugoslav football. But it was something that had also been ongoing in in Yugoslav football the years prior and also beyond. Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade were playing a year later. A normal game of their league competition, with Yugoslavia still being intact. But it's important for the Bad Blue Boys in order to position themselves as memory entrepreneurs at the forefront of the creation of Croatian nationhood to structure this event as sort of really the day that the war started. And how is this done? You have several, and I only show you a couple of images. You have several murals in Zagreb, particularly in Zagreb, that depict this is the iconic image of the back then captain of Dinamo Zagreb, Zvonimir Boban, kicking a Yugoslav police officer, and of course symbolically he was not just kicking one police officer but an entire political system. On the right you can see an epitaph in front of Dinamo Zagreb's stadium, in which it says, "This is to all the fallen heroes to whom the war started on this very day." And if you look closely, I'm not sure whether it's really sort of noticeable. It shows on the left-hand side, it shows the fans and the riots of May 1990 slowly morphing into soldiers of the Croatian army. So a clear sort of continuity there. Another two murals, again in Zagreb, one on the right-hand side was unveiled only, I think, last year or the year before, next to an elementary school. The other one is in one of New Zagreb suburbs. I'm not entirely sure whether it's Trnsko, but I think it's Trnsko. Here also on the left-hand side is a very small poster in central Zagreb, and on the right-hand side a big a sequence of banners by the Bad Blue Boys, which depicted the photographs that I just mentioned, again depicting the riots of 1990. Going beyond Maksimir and sort of taking the bigger picture of the Homeland War, particularly around the commemorations of the so-called military action Oluja in 1995, that saw the first, or depending on which perspective you take, the first or the last steps towards full reintegration of Croatian statehood, and the last days of the so-called Republika Srpska Krajina, paramilitary formation of Croatian Serbs that lasted from 1991 until 1995. A military action that is in literature, if it's not nationalist literature, still sort of widely problematized because of the fact that post Oluja, more than 200,000 Croatian Serbs left the country, and the numerous extrajudicial killings that happened during that period. It is something that is certainly at the center of each year's sort of commemorative process within or commemorative circle for football fans around July and August. On the left-hand side, it's Torcida Split. On the right-hand side, Bad Blue Boys Zagreb. Here you can see on the left-hand side, it's the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of Oluja by Enka Rijeka's Armada, who formed a chain of pyrotechnics along the Krčki most, so the Krk bridge from the island of Krk to the Croatian mainland, which is close by Rijeka. And to the right-hand side, this is only from the World Cup in Qatar a few weeks back, when Croatia was playing Canada. Canada had Milan Borjan in goal, who was born in Knin and had to flee Knin after the military operation of Oluja, who was haunted here by Croatian fans hoisting a flag of the tractor and agricultural machinery producer John Deere, with with the letters Knina 95. Another sort of way how World War II, for example, to go a little bit a step further, is commemorated is through the usage of the Ustasha U in a variety of name and village towns when celebrating the Croatian national football team. I don't think I have to go all too much into detail about the independent state of Croatia, the quisling fascist state that existed between 41 and 45. Noticeably, both of these cities or villages are not in today's Croatia, but in today's Bosnia-Herzegovina. It tells you a lot about also sort of the of ethnic identity and the way sort of transnational ethnic identities are still strong between Croatian, Bosnian Croatians and Croatians from the so-called motherland or homeland. Another way of honoring the World War, honoring Homeland War heroes, again through murals. Here on the right-hand side, you have from the military operation Oluja, its masterminds Markac and Gotovina, two generals. On the left-hand side, you have the commemoration by Tornado Zadar, so a basketball fan group, who commemorated the death of General Praljak, who to some of you might be better known as the guy who killed himself in The Hague when he got the guilty verdict at the ICTY, probably, well, it's a few years back. I don't know whether it's 2018 or 2019. Another few just images here from Osijek, one and the other one from Split, and the one from Osijek also dedicated to Markac and Gotovina, with a couple of lovely Ustasha Uz that were put there, I guess, post creation. I'm not sure whether they're still there, but I was in Osijek, I think it was 2017 and 2019, and on both occasions these fascist symbols were still there, and this is basically on the main square next to the cathedral in Osijek. On the left hand side, it's just an image of also an iconic image of soldiers defending the city of Vukovar. And I'll get to the city right away because it takes up sort of an iconic place in the narrative of Croatian victimhood and the Homeland War. Here, sort of another motive or another sort of topic that they engage mostly with is the commemoration and the celebration of particular units. You'll find them sort of all over Zagreb, that particularly so the units who recruited from these parts of the town are commemorated, and always you'll find some sort of a reference to football here. Sort of in this one, there's a variety of references where maybe there's the Catholic Church, the Dinamo Zagreb, also sort of problematic Ustasha symbolry. And to sort of wrap it up, the one sort of topic that unites all of the fan groups in Croatia is certainly the commemoration of Vukovar and the fall of Vukovar. Vukovar, an East Slavonian city that fell in November of 1991 and has become a symbol for Croatian victimhood and suffrage, and is sort of on a yearly basis commemorated by organized football fans. The picture on the left is from Rijeka. The picture on the right is from Vukovar itself, excuse me. And interestingly, the fan groups have sort of a declaration of understanding as to which they go all together to Vukovar every November without sort of getting any internal issues in the way and commemorate the fallen city and the heroes of the fallen city. Here also sort of a couple of images. One on the right is just sort of a big mural towards about Vukovar being painted or in process of being painted. On the left-hand side, a bit of activism and activism against the introduction of the Cyrillic script, which should have been introduced in Vukovar due to the fact that there is a certain level of Croatian Serbs living there, and by the Croatian constitution, both the Latin and the Cyrillic script should have been included in the city that is sort of symbolically so loaded. And just another sort of few examples, these are from all over Croatia. But just to sort of assure you that this is something that you can find basically on every step, particularly in the main cities, but also in the Dalmatian hinterland. This is, for example, in the Dalmatian hinterland on the way from Sinj to Split. Yes, so basically what we want to be looking at, and sort of I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas on that. I gave you an indicator as to how big this issue is and how prevalent this is in Zagreb cityscapes, and how dominant this has become in the way that the Homeland War and other moments of Croatian history are remembered in the public space. But what we want to be looking at is particularly who are these artists and who are the organizations who coordinate these murals, because nobody really knows, and there has to be some level of interaction between the artists, the veteran organizations, the ultras, but also other stakeholders, urban planners, local politicians, etc. You can't just sort of paint a 50 meters mural without getting some sort of a blanco check from someone. Again, what are the motivations for these topics in the murals? How do they, was there any sort of democratic process into how it's decided which topics, which content do these murals depict? And we would like to sort of work towards a typology of murals in the project. And why, I mean, sort of the main question being why there is an increase of these murals 25, 30 years after the war. It's not like there haven't been any murals in the mid 1990s or late 1990s, but this is sort of a process that has been overwhelmingly, also that has accelerated significantly in the last 5 to 10 years. Some concluding ideas, and then I'll stop. Football fans and their mnemonic practices in stadia, and particularly through murals during commemorations and otherwise, are arguably the most visible and prominent articulation of memory narratives in reference to the Homeland War. Whether it's the most prominent, it could be debatable, but the most visible sort of for everyone in the public space, I think this goes so that this is beyond argument, particularly if you look at sort of in contrast to the newly formed official monuments that are also popping up all over Croatia. Their centrality is not as the one that you also, the overwhelming centrality in the cityscape is not as the one by the murals. Football fans are the main drivers of muralization and so the muralization of memory. And here we would like to look at comparative studies, particularly in Northern Ireland and Poland, and to see whether this sort of brings us anywhere further. And I think sort of utterly it's about top down and bottom up, and why there has been such a conflict, or is there a conflict in the way that conservative top-down memory is being constructed, and why is that now being partially challenged, partially just augmented, and partially questioned by these bottom-up conservative, patriotic, nationalist groups, and in particular football fan groups in Croatia. And I'll stop it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dario. Thank you all for your papers. We would normally have just 7 minutes left, but I think we can extend the discussion a bit. However, I will refrain from my comments, because then we really wouldn't have any time for the Q&A. I would now like to ask the audience to ask questions or give comments. Please, everyone, keep your answers and comments brief. We can extend the discussion for around 20 more minutes, and then we really have to finish. You can raise your hand and then speak up. You can also write in chat. I see that Pablo already has his hand up. Please just speak up. Thank you.
First of all, congratulations to the three presenters. I learned so much from all the presentations. Mahfoud, I lived in Algeria from 78 to 79. I lived in Oran, and I went back actually I'm of Nigerian origin, even with my British accent, and I was there in 1990 when Algeria beat Nigeria 1-0. Two quick things. This is for all the presenters. Mahfoud was the one who primarily talked in terms of scale, and in terms of talking not just about the nation as the site and the contestation of a nation, but also the central role of the diaspora. So there's an issue of scale, it seems to me, here that it needs to be a part of all of the discussions about how we view memory and how memory is also displaced. I think there's an important element. I teach development studies, so I'm interested in the whole question around displacement. And Dario, at the end of your presentation, you talked about, for example, the issue of the institutions that enable these murals to go on. And so this analytical separation between top down and bottom up might be, it seems to me, to be a little bit questionable, right? So in the context of the broader discussions, one needs to think about diaspora. I'm in a country where diaspora is the nature of who we are in some ways, whether it's Montreal or whether it's Winnipeg, or whether it's Toronto, where there's a large Croatian community, as well as, of course, the Ukrainian community. So I'm interested in two things. One is the people who play themselves, the footballers. Have you interviewed any of the footballers, right? And to think about how they play into the context of the creation of memory. That's one thing. The second is that issue of scale and diaspora, and to look at how the diaspora, so Olga, how the Ukrainian diaspora understand these different ways of reconstructing memory of the way in which the narratives are developed. So there are really my two questions. One is scale and diaspora, and the other one is actually looking at the actual, it's very difficult in the context, of course, the death match to do this, but certainly in the context of Algeria and certainly Croatia, to interview the players themselves as part of the construction of memory. But thank you, all three presenters. I learned so much from what everyone had to say. Thank you so much.
I don't know, may I comment first a little bit? All right. Well, the thing is about the death match, it's not really, I would say, nation building event. Is just something that, well, I want to show that about the Second World War. But if you're talking about more kind of in parallel with what Dario said, I did my research about the ultras of football fans and their participation in Maidan in Europe 2014 and the Donbas War. And by the way, Croatian from Dinamo Zagreb, they really much participated in the beginning of in 2014, 2015. With ultras in Azov battalion, by the way, so much parallels. And talking about commemoration within the diaspora, football fans and ultras, there is this parallel in the usage of these events in the construction of Ukrainian identity of Maidan and the Donbas War. Definitely it's going to be after this particular stage of the war that is happening currently right now in Ukraine. But there was already use on the stadium with the slogans, with the banners, etc. This commemoration of those events, not really a death match. But the death match, probably, I'm not an expert of the Russian football fans and the Russian community. Probably it is used, though it has happened in Kiev in Ukraine. That's the point. It's kind of used by the Russian propaganda, maybe for commemoration of the Russian identity or Soviet identity, I would rather say, but the Ukrainian part absolutely not using the death match for this sake. But it is I kind of wrote about this in my research. that because of decommunization, Ukrainian national identity, sort of Ukrainian space left out without what is national identity of Ukrainians. And after Maidan, it was started constructed by football fans and by football players themselves. I not interviewed, but I kind of spoke in parallel with Zuzula. It is still the players of Dnipropetrovsk, but they are using the more event of Maidan and Donbas war for the commemoration and construction of the identity, not that match at all. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's
Thank
all.
you. Thank you.
Thank you for thank you for the questions. And as you said, I mean the diaspora is by itself. You can have just the presentation only on that in terms of how the memory is kind of shaping the whole diasporic kind of identity and at the different levels, the levels of the players themselves. How they go into selecting or deciding either to play for the country of the birth or country of origin, what kind of pressure they have from their parents, from their family back home, and this is applicable to all African players who have extended family in Europe. And so sometimes some of those players, they find themselves that in their pressure that they have to choose to play for the country of to play for the national team of the country of origin, so that as a favor for their families, for their parents, as a way to thank them, or as a way to celebrate their memory as immigrants. I haven't done interviews with those athletes to find out how they go in terms of deciding to rationalizing their decisions, and even with the fans, who are of, for example, of Algerian origin, how they go in terms of deciding either to support the French national team or the Algerian national team, or both. Or it's in itself, this is very interesting, and maybe you can write. And for any postgraduate students who are thinking to do their PhDs, I mean, this is really a very interesting topic. What I was my work was more into discourse analysis, and I was looking more at the media content analysis, both in Algeria, how they define those players, for example, of who are of dual citizenship in different moments of victory, but also when the national team is losing. And also I was doing some similar content analysis of the French media, how they are looking at those, how they are defining the identity, multiple identity of those players with regards to in the internal, for example, the French politics, and and the kind of the far rights, and how they want impose one linear kind of definition of how to be French, and the French loyalty shouldn't be divided, and it has to be one and sacred. And so I was looking more at institutional narrative and media content analysis. But you are right, I mean, doing field work and interviews is very important.
Yeah. Shukran.
Yeah.
Maybe just sort of one or two points from my perspective. I guess sort of with modern athletes, it's apart from the fact that they've become very sheltered, and that they do abstain generally from expressing any sort of potentially damaging or politicized or polarizing statement on anything. In the Croatian context, I think sort of historically, looking at the way that the Croatian national team, and these are the players who would have sort of the potential to actually step up and make a significant contribution or statement in, again, for or against one or the other thing, has been constructed along the lines of dominant Croatian national identity and the way that it has been formed in the 1990s. So very rarely you would have anyone who would dare to question these dominant narratives openly and publicly. I think what you were most happy with, or what, so the case where you could be happy with was to have someone like Zvonimir Boban, who considers himself an enlightened nationalist, or someone who's like moderate in his political standpoints and also very cosmopolitan in the way that he lived his life, where he then transcends certain nationalistic stereotypes and parochialisms and provincialisms. Whereas anyone who would openly dare to question the status quo, I don't know, maybe this would be also seen as a heroic act, or something that, you know, somebody dared to question the nationalist hegemony. But then there is a nationalist hegemony for a reason, and to question that is difficult, and also maybe not even authentic, considering that many of these players for the national team would also consider themselves nationalist in moderate terms, presenting Croatia.
I think we have time for one question, definitely, maybe even two. As I said, go ahead, raise your hand, or you can also just use the chat and type your question there. And if there are no questions, I'm aware of the time, and also that in some time zones it's even later than in CET. I would then conclude this panel. I would like to thank all three panelists for really great presentations, and I would use the opportunity to advertise the dMSA format. This is online event series of the Memory Studies Association. This was not only during the first year of the pandemic, but we are obviously continuing with it. And if you have an idea for an event that looks at memory studies from any perspective, you can propose it at. You can find the link on the Memory Studies Association website, and I am the coordinator of this event series. If you also have questions, you can get in touch with me. You can also find this event is streamed on YouTube, and we stream all of them, which means that you can also find all our previous events on YouTube. Thank you again, and have a good day or evening, depending on where you are.